Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. We are your hosts and hopefully your new bookish pals. I'm Hannah MacDonald.
And I'm Lydia Clare. We want to invite you to join us for our brilliant book club episode this month. Our book choice for February is the compelling new novel, Are You Happy Now? By Hanna, Jameson, a riveting dystopia that will have you questioning everything. When the world begins to fill with people who just give up, the question is, how can anyone be happy when the choice is to feel anything or nothing at all?
Hanna Jameson is the author of 5 novels. Her first was written at the age of 17 and later received a John Creasy Dagger Award. Her novel, The Last, published in 2019, was a Sunday Times bestseller and is currently being adapted for Netflix. Somehow, amongst writing for screen projects and publishing her latest novel, she has found time to join us today. So, Hanna, welcome to A Pair of Bookends.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
No, we're so excited to have you. Like, this is amazing. We've been really excited for this. So, yeah, thank you.
We are so excited that Hanna has already leaked that we have you on Instagram.
Okay, cool.
Oh, on my post?
Yeah.
Oops. I mean, yeah, sorry.
You're too excited.
Leaked. Yeah. Sorry, I got excited, yeah.
So we always ask our guests firstly whether you mind sharing what you are currently reading or have recently read.
Okay. Well, I'm not currently reading anything at the moment. I've started, I'm in that weird phase where I've started things and read a few chapters, but then just couldn't persevere with it. But a book I did read and love recently was A Restless Truth by Freya, which is actually a sequel to A Marvellous Light, which was, I'm not sure when it was released. I bought it in paperback this year, and it's so fantastic. It's a kind of magical queer love story that's kind of twinned with a murder mystery. So it's got this kind of magical adventure element, but also like this queer love story. And the second book has the same kind of formula, but a different pairing. And I love that kind of format. I think it's fantastic. And it's also not ridiculously heavy either, so it manages to be moving but without ever feeling like heavy or depressing, which is really cool.
That sounds so good.
We're both like, yes, let me write it down.
Yeah.
No, I love that. So obviously your book Are You Happy Now came out yesterday, which is so exciting. Obviously on the day of recording it was published yesterday. How are you feeling firstly?
I never enjoy this process ever. I wish I could say like, oh, I feel so excited and I'm like dancing around and stuff like that. But you know, this is my 5th book now. I've lived 10 lifetimes in publishing. This is like being 100 years old. So my demeanor is basically that of like this really curmudgeonly old man who just like doesn't want to engage with anything. I think because I just find it really quite excruciating, and it feels very exposing. And sort of it's lovely hearing like from people who enjoy it, but then you also get infuriated because like you pick up on certain words people use and you're like, oh, you're using the wrong words. And yeah, I just find it a very neurotic, like I find it personally just quite a difficult process to deal with for various reasons.
Yeah, I mean, my friend is a writer and she says that like all the sort of publicity stuff, that she's just landed a publishing deal, and she says that like all the publicity stuff is like her worst nightmare. Like she would rather be like cocooned away with her laptop, like not speaking to anybody, writing, than have to talk to people about her books. She's like, can I not just hire somebody to do that for me? I'm like, no.
Yeah, it is very much like that. I think like no one becomes a writer. I think very few people become novelists because they're like exhibitionists and they're like extroverts and they're just desperate to be out there like networking. It's really nerve-wracking, I think, especially, and if you're an introvert, it's very draining as well. Like it just takes a lot of energy. There's always, it's such a relief to see it out, but at the same time there's so many emotions around it.
Yeah, I also really loved earlier you put on your Instagram story, if you don't mind me mentioning.
No. I know exactly what you're referring to as well.
It's so funny.
Oh God.
Being an author is legitimately wild because you get to spend years writing an existential novel about contemporary romance, relationships, and life under late stage capitalism. And read people on the internet complain that it isn't a very good thriller with too much romance. I love it because you see so many ridiculous reviews of books and you're like, have we read the same book? Like,
yeah, it is like infuriating. And like I'm not one of those people who will like, there are, I can't remember which author it was, but that author who like stalked this reviewer to like a different city and like attacked them in a food shop or something. I can't remember who that was, but it did happen. And I'm saying I'm not like that. I would never like respond so personally to a reviewer. But sometimes you do read stuff and you think, I just don't understand what you think you've read. Because like having someone say, oh, it's like as a thriller, it didn't really work. And I'm just like, it's not a thriller.
No.
And like, yeah, like the romance thing as well, like the fact that, someone said, oh, it was weird because like this romantic subplot took over the whole book. I was just like, that's the plot. Like that is quite literally the plot. It's a romance novel. So yeah, I think it's probably just because my last book was a thriller. So I think potentially like a lot of people might approach this and just think I've written a similar, might just expect a similar novel.
Yeah, they're trying to box you off effectively, aren't they? Like,
it is difficult when you're a writer who like ricochets from genre to genre because like I can't say that I'm consistent in the types of projects that I write at all. So yeah, I have gone from a literal apocalyptic thriller with crime elements to a sort of literary romance with kind of speculative element. So yeah, I think it's probably just because there's a lot of preconceptions about what writers are expected to write, and it probably comes from that. But yeah, I just spend a lot of time thinking, but it's a romance. Like,
yeah,
you don't discount that it's a romance,
I love that. I love that. Yeah, you're not allowing yourself to be tied down to like one type of style or genre. Yeah, I think that's amazing. So fuck those people.
No, it's fine. Like literally everyone has their opinion. I think it's just funny being like a person on the internet, and you're always going to see opinions and just wonder where they came from. And I don't think it was malicious or anything. I think it's probably just like someone had a certain expectation of the book, and it's just not remotely close to the genre that the book actually is. It is interesting. I could probably do myself a lot of favors by just writing slightly more what's expected of me, but I simply cannot do that.
No, that would be so boring.
Yeah, don't do that.
We want to be surprised.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ironically, my next book is total thriller elements in it. Yeah, I wouldn't describe it as like a thriller, but I was like, damn it, but my next book is a really good thriller, I think.
I am so excited that you're already writing.
Yeah, I have already finished my next, almost finished my next one.
What?
Wow, pair of bookings exclusive.
Oh, I love that.
I actually haven't really talked to many people about it yet, but yeah, it is almost done and it's really good. So I'm really excited about it.
Oh, amazing.
So obviously there are so many things that we want to ask you about, but one thing that I was particularly interested in was I always love reading an author's acknowledgements at the end of a book. I really look forward to it. And I thought yours were amazing. And I was particularly interested in you talking about the fanfic and AO3 community, which is the writer that I referenced earlier, my friend. She also writes for AO3 and fan fiction. And I've definitely been told by her about the snobbish kind of the people that can be quite snobbish about that style of writing and stuff. I was really curious whether this contributed to you starting out as a writer. And if you could you just let our listeners know what fanfic and AO3 are?
Oh, this is interesting to try to explain to people who aren't in fandom communities. Fanfiction is just the utilization of existing characters to write original stories. So, fanfiction isn't necessarily just what people write for free online. It's also what people like Neil Gaiman write. It's also like, the Odyssey is literally Greek god fan fiction. You know, there's so many, any writing that sort of utilizes existing characters to tell a different story. That's probably how I would describe it. And AO3 is a website. It's an archive. It's like an internet archive where literally anyone, and the cross section of people who use it are, you know, it's so broad. I know for a fact that like a lot of pro writers use it, and also like aspiring writers. There are like 12-year-olds on there trying their hand at writing. Wow. And you know, it's, I mean, there are millions upon millions of stories in there, and you know, a lot of it is very maligned. Like, it's certainly not every story is going to be for everyone, but it's, you know, it's literally an archive. You can search it like any library archive. You search it by a very detailed tagging system. You can search it by rating. You can search it by characters. You can search for, you know, you can search for Hunger Games, you can search for Buffy, you can search for anything. And yeah, it can be sometimes hard just from the volume of material to find stuff that you really enjoy. But I've read some works on there that were truly life-changing. There are writers on there who aren't pros, but who I consider like some of the best writers I've ever come across. How they construct story and how they convey emotion, it's absolutely just mind-blowing. So yeah, I think, like, you know, I've been writing all kinds of stories since I was a teenager. And you know, AO3, I wasn't aware of AO3 when I was a teenager. I was like back in the days of stuff like fanfiction.net and like typing fanfiction directly into like forum posts and stuff like that, like really old, like old stuff. But yeah, like, it's just you know, online communities are places where people can practice their writing, and they're generally really supportive communities as well. And you get really good like instant feedback as well, and it's all anonymous, or as anonymous as you want it to be. So yeah, that would be my sort of explanation of it. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's just for like anyone to kind of moonlight in. It probably helps if you're like part of a fandom community, like a diehard fan of something, then you'd really enjoy it.
I think I need to search up Grey's Anatomy fan fiction, because
there will definitely be something. Yeah.
I love that.
I think it's a brilliant kind of creative outlet for a lot of people. I think it's lovely that we have that option to be able to use that and share stuff so easily nowadays. I think it's a lovely way to communicate with each other. I certainly like a bit of fan fiction myself.
Yeah, like, I mean, it's just fun. Like, I think people forget a lot of the time, it is just like, fandom is just meant to be fun. It's just a playground where you can like experiment with different stuff, and it doesn't have to be treated like published literature. It's not mainstream published literature. It's just people having fun online and writing with their friends, you know, about characters that they love. And there's just something really like organic and like cool about it that, I don't know. I've spent my whole life kind of in and out of fandom communities, so it's kind of it doesn't feel that weird or scary to me. But some people like really don't like it for some reason.
Well, I have to say, if I don't see some fan fiction of your brilliant and dynamic cast of characters, I will be very disappointed, because
you know what, that's when you know you've really made it. Like, that is a marker of like cultural impact, 100%. If people are out there being like, I'm going to write Yoon and Andrew fan fiction,
oh my god,
yes please.
I don't know how my publisher feels about that. Just like, I don't care. Like, go out and like write whatever you want, guys. Like,
absolutely, like 100%. I mean, they're so, particularly main four characters. We're talking Emery, Yoon, Finn, and Andrew. They're all so dynamic, so well written.
Thanks.
And the way that what I loved is the way that they interact with each other, because it's filled with complexity.
Yeah.
No conversation is just a conversation. There's so much more to it. So how was it creating this quite charismatic quartet?
It was quite a convoluted process, actually, because I usually find that whenever I write a book, it's basically a 3-draft process. So there's the first draft, which I usually abandon about halfway through when I realize exactly what's wrong with it. And then there's the second draft, where in this case, I think around second draft, the book was still only had two main characters. It was just about Yoon and Emery. Like Andrew and Finn didn't exist as characters at that stage. And it was kind of a more straightforward relationship story with the kind of speculative backdrop and the sort of capitalistic backdrop. And then it began to occur to me that something was just feeling off about the world building. And I came to the conclusion that Yoon felt too isolated. And, you know, as a Korean American character, I found it weird that he didn't have any close Asian friends in New York City. And I thought, like, it doesn't feel real to me. It feels like a kind of, you know, like old Sex and the City episodes kind of thing, right? Where New York is just like completely white. Yeah. And, you know, a token person of color just has all white friends for some reason. And I thought, well, that's not true of any non-white person I know, any Asian person I know. So I thought, okay, like I do need to introduce like a wider cast of characters that, you know, aren't necessarily narrative POVs, but they need to have a presence in the narrative. So I thought about that for a few days. And then weirdly, I had about 3 chapters written of another project, which, you know, the characters were already Andrew and Finn, and it was these two men meeting in an art gallery. And it, you know, literally like as is written. But I thought it was something totally different. And I just kind of looked at it and thought, God, the tone of this is actually really similar. And Andrew is already Chinese Canadian. Like, are these two narratives like a kind of, do they belong together? So I wrote the third draft of the book, including Andrew's POV.
Wow.
And then just for the hell of it, I thought, you know, because Finn wasn't meant to be a returning character either, I originally planned it to be a one-night stand. And then I thought, let's see what his voice is like. And then it turned out really good. So I was like, oh my God, I've got 4 characters now. So I just kind of have to see what happens, because I don't know what the story is from, like, with the 4 of them. So yeah, at first I was writing kind of Yoon and Andrew's kind of trajectory as like more friendship jealousy, which I think is a really interesting sort of emotion to explore anyway. But then Yoon's reaction started to feel quite like dramatic, even by his standards. And I was like, why is he so like hostile to this idea, you know, that Andrew has like formed this new relationship and discovered this amazing thing about his identity. And I was like, oh my God, is he just in love with his best friend? Like, oh my God, I think that's it. And it just kind of clicked into place. And I was like, oh, I get it now. Right. I get it.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's one of those really old tales of just, he's in love with his best friend. Fantastic. I can write about that. So yeah, the third draft just went really smoothly. I finished it in about 3 months.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I love that. And I'm a big fan of novels with like multiple perspectives. And I wrote it in my review online that like you can read some novels with multiple perspectives where it feels like some of the characters are slightly underwritten, but with this, like, I just didn't get that at all. Like, I really felt like I knew these people, and as Lydia was saying before, like, they were so well written in all their like complexities and flaws, and I just like, I fell in love with all of them, and I didn't want to like lose them. I'm like sad that I had to leave them.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Like, I found it really hard to let go of them as well. Like,
I'm not surprised.
They were very hard to leave behind. So it's really cool to hear that people are having the same reaction.
Yeah. This is why we need to write fan fiction.
Yeah.
So I can have more.
Yes, exactly. Like, oh my God, like if I could just write fan fiction of my own novel, like, I mean, I presumably can. I suppose that would just be like a sequel or a spin-off or something. But yeah, I would wholeheartly like to see if other people have takes on the ending, because, you know, that final scene between Yoon and Andrew really could have gone any way, and I didn't really know how it was going to end, that chapter specifically, when I sort of got into it. And I tried writing a few different versions, but it just didn't, like, I don't know, it didn't like click necessarily. So I just went with what I'd written originally. But other people may feel differently, I'm not sure. Like, other people may have sort of stronger feelings about people who should have ended up together. And yeah, I'd like to hear them if people do.
I have very strong feelings. Mainly at that scene, my book was thrown.
Really?
No!
Oh
But yeah, I mean, I'll leave our bookends to read it. But
which scene made you throw your book? The Andrew and Finn or Andrew and Yoon?
Yeah, Andrew and Yoon. when
okay.
he opens his mouth to say something and he already knew what he was going to say before he said it. And I was like, I know. And I was like, no, that wasn't what you were meant to say.
No,
he never says what he's meant to say. Like, I swear to God.
No.
Yeah.
But that's what this book does so well. Like, there are so many moments where you're like, there's just things that are unsaid, and you're like, you know how that character's feeling, and you're like, just bloody say what you're thinking, or like, oh, the whole way through, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Like, there was so much tension. I was just, completely on edge the whole time. And stupidly, like, I read every night before bed, but how are you supposed to sleep when you write a book like this? Like, I don't. It was impossible.
Insomniacs.
Oh, that's so good.
So I had written this question out before looking on your Instagram earlier, in which you wrote in your bio the books you've written, and you put, "Are you happy now?" and in brackets, "not a pandemic novel." So I apologize that this question. So I wanted to ask, you wrote "Are you happy now?" during the pandemic. But was the novel inspired by or enhanced by COVID? Because it feels like, although you're saying it's not a pandemic novel, I feel like there are certain, like, I don't know how else to describe this, but like the vibes of the book felt like the vibes of life during the panny day. So
panny day.
My friend called it.
Describe it up north.
My friend called it the panorama today, so I was like, I don't know which is better, really. But yeah, I wanted to know whether it was inspired by or just sort of enhanced by the pandemic, if it had any impact at all, even.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it definitely wasn't inspired by, because the sort of concept actually was started in 2019.
Right.
So it was started sort of before that kind of took over literally everything. But yeah, like finishing sort of drafting, especially like draft sort of 2 and 3, draft 3 was written literally while I was just alone in my flat during lockdown, and I didn't see anyone for like weeks on end, and at some points I felt like I was going insane. So yeah, aspects of it were definitely enhanced by that experience. And it was also like, I think the reason I sort of preemptively say it's not a pandemic novel is because people just have a lot of preconceptions about what a pandemic novel is.
Yeah.
And it's not a pandemic novel in that it's not, people aren't catching a virus. It's literally a novel about capitalism and living in a state of daily crisis. And, there's a reason why I sort of start the book and I introduce this kind of epidemic of despair, like mass despair and mass kind of suicidality, is that the word? And I wanted people to react as I see our society react to crises, which is that it takes over the news cycle for a brief period of time when it's a novelty, and it's all anyone talks about, and people talk about it, people sort of identify the buzzwords, and then after like a few months, a few weeks, if you're lucky, the news cycle just moves on, even though the crisis is still objectively happening. So yeah, there's a reason why I sort of introduced the crisis and then faded the crisis into the background of just how these characters were living, because that's how I view every crisis is taking place in the last few years. It dominates for a very brief period of time, and then you realize everything about how we live is just almost a permanent state of crisis now. So yeah, that was more the tone, like the vibes of the book were definitely inspired by that specific phenomenon.
And I think you definitely get a sense of, as Lydia was saying before, you see how the characters are interacting with other characters and their relationships and stuff, but you also get a big insight on how they are when they're alone, if that makes sense. And I feel like you don't really it's rare for novels to do that. So I think you definitely got a sense of like you writing this in isolation, like you saw these people as isolated people, but also the way they interacted with each other. I just thought it was so brilliantly done, and definitely like the mood of the book was very much like how I felt during the pandemic. This whole like, what the fuck is going on?
Just a constant state of anxiety.
Yes, that
like low level anxiety.
Yeah. I think it's specifically the feeling that like all of these, you think your life is going to go a certain way, and you think that society always kind of moves in the way of progress, and it doesn't. Like these upheavals just show like how fragile everything about how we live is. And it's no coincidence that the crisis that sort of changes Yoon's life most significantly is not the epidemic, the despair epidemic, the catatonia. It's just American healthcare.
Yeah.
And how it like grinds people up and destroys them. And that's, I don't want to like spoiler, but yeah, there's a reason that it was that and not the crisis that's dominating the newspapers.
I wanted to talk, I mean, this is again me just being selfish asking the questions that burning questions I had. I wanted to ask about my favorite relationship, friendship in the novel between Andrew and Yoon, of course, because I really feel like it was a real highlight for me, just watching their kind of the complexity of their emotions towards each other, and how that changed throughout was just absolutely bonkers. I feel like you write from the male perspective really well as well, like very clearly, and some of the moments between the two of them were beautiful, absolutely beautiful. What was it like to try and find their voices?
I mean, they were both quite different. I mean, it sounds like stating the obvious, but they were just very different characters to write, because Andrew I found very difficult to, like, I found him understandable, but he's also very different from me. I'd say like of the four, Andrew differs the most from sort of how I deal with things and how I think and how he approaches just anything. So Andrew was he wasn't as difficult to get to know as Emery, but he was, I don't know, like he's a very precise thinker. And I mean, just the way, I don't know how to describe it, but just the way he interacts with people is not how I manage to quite a lot of the time. And I find him like very admirable. And then Yoon was such a, oh my God, Yoon was just like a roller coaster experience, because the book opens with him and it ends with him. And I realized sort of towards the end of the novel, like, yes, it's a main cast of four, but Yoon is the soul of this book, like very much so. And he is also, I think, the character that is most similar to me, which is a weird thing to acknowledge because I think he's an asshole quite a lot of the time.
He is a bit of a knob.
Yeah, but I have this like really deep love and sympathy towards him, because I see so many of so many traits that I don't have much compassion for in myself in Yoon. And I sort of looked at him and I thought, if I'd experienced kind of one more failure, or if I'd had one more upheaval, or if I'd had a particular derailment, I could so see myself like being in his mindset. He's such an angry person, and I really relate to that. Like I also do think of myself as a very angry person. It's just expressed differently from how Yoon expresses it. But I also kind of admire him as well. Like there are moments where I almost think, I admire him for refusing to adjust, for refusing to be happy when he doesn't see anything in society to be happy about. And I really like that about him as well. Yeah, very complicated person.
I could definitely relate to him in the sense of being a creative, trying to make it, and how like relentless it is, and like how that sort of forms you as a person, and it feels like it takes over your identity if you don't quite make it. So yeah, I felt like I could relate to him definitely, in those moments of like bitterness and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And like it's a really different, I think like I'd love to see more creatives kind of talk about those emotions a little bit, because like, everyone is very, I don't know, I feel like the creative industries have this veneer of positivity, which on the one hand is really nice because everyone's just super happy and super grateful to be here and it's just such a great experience, but like there's kind of an unwillingness to talk about the aspects of it which are really difficult, really exploitative, and really ruthless, and also just fucking irritating, without sounding ungrateful or bitter or you know, just trying to like be honest about the fact that it's not always this kind of transcendental, like blissful experience.
But it's the fact that it's the fact that we have to caveat, you know, any vaguely negative talk with being like, oh, you know, I'm not ungrateful. Like, but actually, exactly. Like the stuff that we have to put up with is bullshit. Like, so why shouldn't we be able to say that?
No, I agree. Like, I would never, like, I'm not, I don't know, on the one hand, like, of course I'm not ungrateful for my career. Like, I've been supremely lucky, and like, you know, also lucky to have so many readers who've just enjoyed the books. Like, that's incredible. But yeah, on the other hand, there are aspects of it which are really exposing, really hurtful. And because when you're a creative as well and you've poured years of your life into something, it does feel personal.
Yeah.
So like, you know, if you sort of, it is hard not to take even the smallest things very personally.
I think there was a bit in the book where you say, I've got it quoted on my phone here, which was how most people I knew that work in the arts felt during the pandemic, which was any job in the arts was the canary in the coal mine when it came to the economy. It's just like all these people that are just completely forgotten about and just abandoned, and people think that their careers are totally irrelevant. I really felt that.
Yeah, it was definitely a reflection of how, like, to use literally a direct pandemic comparison. I mean, during COVID, like, the arts was just like put in the bin.
Yeah.
Which is crazy because, like, you know, during lockdown, everyone turned to TV, everyone like read books. Like, art is kind of what kept people going. But, you know, self-employed artists were literally an afterthought, just no support at all. And I thought, like, that's such a, you know, your work has so much value, but your labor as an artist is so devalued. And it's just, it's one of those really weird, like, paradoxes, I think, of like just working within this system. It's really weird to see.
Yeah. So the novel does begin at a New York wedding, which is where this almost domino effect global event occurs for the first time. But why was it important for you for the setting to be a wedding at the start of something so catastrophic?
Is it a wedding? I don't know. I know, like, that's such a specific question, and like there may have been a reason for it, but oh my God, like going back like 2 or 3 years, I'm not entirely sure what my thought process was. I think it's because I actually quite enjoy rom-com tropes, but I quite like to make them awful. So I thought, like, you know, it's really cute to sort of have a boy meets girl situation at a wedding, and then the wedding is actually the site of like this really awful kind of, you know, the beginning of this horrendous epidemic that kind of changes everyone's lives. And also because like the couple who are getting married, who are like friends of the main characters, like their kind of relationship is in the background of all of this as well. And it's the fact that all of this happened at their wedding, and then the fallout from that. It's just very interesting. It's meant to be this really happy, kind of hopeful, joyous event, but you know, it's always the question of like, well, is everyone, you know, is it this joyous event? Like, I don't know.
Oh no,
I think it worked really well, like plot wise as well, because when someone does sit down at a wedding on the dance floor, you do kind of think, oh, she's had too much.
yeah, exactly. I mean,
you know, or then you do conclude, well, all right, okay, she's acting weird, she's obviously had something that she shouldn't have, and then it's next, oh well, someone's probably spiked it. So I think it worked really well as kind of like, you know, something's wrong, but you're not quite sure why. And I thought it was just a fabulous opening.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Because nobody could predict like how that was gonna turn out, like at all.
No, not at all. And like, I think also just having like, I don't know, just thinking cinematically, like having a big group scene, especially like a party scene where the 4 main characters they're all at this event and they all have different perspectives and experiences of this event. So it's quite a pivotal moment you can always return to as well. Like I sort of returned to the wedding, I think, a couple of times, like that night specifically, and go sort of deeper into what different characters were feeling. So yeah, I think that's just like an enjoyable thing to do.
It absolutely is. I loved it.
Yeah, me too.
I love seeing the different sides to the wedding. You know, you see it from one shot in the first part of the book, and then we get to see, you know, behind the scenes, and then down a corridor and in a room. And I think it's just a great setting. Absolutely. I think what I also really enjoyed about the book, I say enjoyed, it was the sense of kind of like apathy that a lot of the characters have about the world around them, and how that kind of grows within itself. Also how they respond to kind of like the capitalistic nature of the country that they live in. And again, you were talking about Vuong, who has at one point, he has an extensive bill that he has to pay that is just devastating. And unfortunately, you can see the reason why this becomes so much more important than anything around him, in terms of, you know, the world might be coming to an end, but you've got to pay your rent on time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. Which is what we all still had to do, right? And I think it was really interesting the way that you approached that. What kind of role do you think that kind of apathetic nature had in the novel? And also, why did you want to make capitalism like more of a central theme?
I mean, regarding the kind of attitude of the characters, I'm not sure apathetic is the word I'd use, but I actually don't know what word I'd use in its place. Because, I mean, one of my friends who read it, she kind of, like, her comment was, "Oh, this is just the most millennial novel ever." And I found that really interesting, because I wrote it kind of in response to what I felt was just a lack in millennial writing. And I think it's because a very particular style of writer, and I enjoy Sally Rooney's books, like, don't get me wrong, Conversations with Friends is a fantastic book, and I really enjoyed Normal People. But there's a very specific type of voice which is very detached and very clinical and very ironic, that a lot of people have held up and said, you know, this is the millennial voice, this is the millennial experience. And I've read so many of these styles of these types of novels by different writers, and I don't relate to them at all. Like, if anything, I experience feeling too much and caring too much, and grappling with what it means to just deal with so many emotions. And sometimes it is easier to just be like, you know what, I'm going to dissociate. I'm going to maybe dissociation rather than apathy, actually.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. It's that detachment almost, isn't it? From like, especially I think with Yoon's experience, that kind of, I'm gonna, rather than deal with all of this that is happening, I'm just gonna have to take a step back here.
Yeah, he just willfully shuts down, because he can't cope with just these repeat traumas. And I really, like, I sympathize with that so much. And I think, you know, that is the central question of the novel, is that, like, people were not designed to cope with this much trauma, with witnessing like this much, like, you know, global crises. Like, I don't think our brains are able to process it very well. And also just the fact that because capitalism is the current system that we all live under, it gives you no time to like reconcile your emotions. Like, everyone talks about therapy endlessly, but like, does therapy really give you that breathing space if you're still having to work like 12 hours a day every single day just to like scrape by with rent that is always going up? And you know, everything gets more expensive perpetually.
$50 a session for counseling, but you know,
exactly. And that's like the cheaper end. And you know, so if you're fortunate enough to even have access to universal healthcare, you know, the wait list for therapy on, say, the NHS is like, what, a year and a half, 2 years or something. So like, it's just the fact there's no breathing space. Like, there's no way for people to grapple with collective grief and collective trauma. Like, everyone is just brutally like propelled onwards, because we're all like at the mercy of just this bottomless pit of greed at the top. I'm talking about like the 1%. And I think that's why I made kind of capital. I think that's why the book is also about capitalism, because it is a book about a mental health crisis. It's a book about a despair epidemic, which to me is life under capitalism. It's just, it's slightly allegorical or a metaphor, but it is reflective of how like me and like so many other people I know feel on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
I think, you were just mentioning like the mental health crisis aspect of living under capitalism, and I specifically loved the way that you explored mental health in this book. I thought it was so well done. I loved the way you looked at the way people sort of trivialize other people's struggles, the way some of the sitters' experiences were sort of dismissed as choice. The whole, I don't know if this is too much of a spoiler, but I'll edit it out if it is.
Okay.
But the decision in the hospitals to not, what's the word? They said that they wouldn't take them in,
accommodate them anymore.
Accommodate them, that's the word. Yeah, they wouldn't
because
accommodate
they knew
them anymore.
They were going to die.
Yeah. Can that be kept in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I don't think that's too much of a spoiler. Yeah.
But why was the theme of mental health so important to you in this novel, and specifically, I guess, the sort of human ignorance in the face of a mental health crisis?
I think a big part of it is kind of a reflection of, I mean, there's two sides to kind of the mental health crisis, and both of them I find equally interesting. And one is that the language of mental health and pathology is now applied to everything, like to the most minute sort of interpersonal interactions, in a way I find interesting, but also really infuriating. Because no one, if you listen to people talk now, no one's an asshole anymore. Like everyone's a narcissist, or they're a psychopath. These are like clinical terms. And of
toxic.
Course, like not everyone who ever, they're toxic. And it's just like, not everyone who disagrees with you is going to be a clinical narcissist or a sociopath, or like, chances are it's just someone who you don't vibe with and you don't like. And it's really weird because like no one just dislikes anyone anymore. You don't hear anyone going, oh, he's just such a dickhead, can't stand that guy. And then the flip side of it is just like, I don't know anyone who sort of isn't going through some kind of traumatic reconciliation, or just trying to like grapple with the effect of like compounding traumas or grief. Like grief is a huge one, like not having the time or space to like really grieve, and also having grief pathologized in turn, like turned into a medical process that you just kind of have to go through the 5 stages, and that's super neat, and it's just not how grief manifests at all. I mean, so like I think Andrew talks about this at one point in a university lecture, but also the fact that so few people truly feel like they have agency in their own lives, and how damaging that is, to feel like you're ultimately not in control of your own fate. You're subject to the whims of all of these systems, which always seem to be in crisis and on the verge of collapse, and like what that does to people's psyches. So I think like I find all of that equally interesting to explore.
Yeah, it was so powerful the way that you wrote about it. And I just found it so interesting the way that each character sort of deals with their own struggles. Some of them just totally ignore it, like it's not a thing. And then that causes them more damage in the long run. And you see that with your own like friends and family. You see the people around you who is quite open in speaking about their mental health struggles, and who will just shut down and be like, nope, feelings aren't a thing. So I really liked that you represented all those different types of people, because that is how a mental health crisis occurs, because so many of us are repressing things and leaving things unsaid and feeling unable to express ourselves. And I just thought it was so well done.
Absolutely.
And it's there's an interesting kind of dichotomy between like expression and action as well, because one thing I've noticed, sort of especially like in our age, our generation and younger, and also like probably a little bit older as well, people have become a lot more comfortable expressing themselves, because we do have access to kind of a wider variety of terminology to describe like mental health phenomena. But then like because like social media is so ubiquitous and stuff, I think we've got into this weird kind of constant feedback loop where people think that expression is enough. That like it's kind of like the obsession with mental health awareness. It's just like, oh, people just need to be aware. They need to be aware, more awareness, no material help for anybody, just aware. Like just people need to talk, like reach out. And it's just like, reach out for fucking what? You know, there's nothing there. Like you can't access actual treatment. It's so difficult. And like, you know, employers like are so like hostile to accommodating like mental health crises. They're just like, oh, you know, do yoga in your spare time. Like, oh no, we're not going to pay you more so that you're not objectively worrying about money and housing and all of those things. But like, oh yeah, try yoga, try meditation. And so like, yeah, it's this kind of like talking is replacing a certain kind of action. Where like what people really need to do is start demanding more from these systems that are just wholesale failing people. But like to do that, it involves taking action. Like it can't just be talking.
Yeah,
absolutely. I find that a lot as well when people talk about grief a lot. I mean, listeners of the pod will know it's like my specialist subject. But for me, it's very much about when someone is grieving, or you are grieving, or you know someone that's grieving, that there is the only thing you can do, in my opinion, should do, is offer practical help. There's nothing else. Like you can say I'm a shoulder to cry on, I am, but it's just words until it becomes showing up on a doorstep with food, or coming and washing the dishes for someone, or you know, going out and saying I found this that you could do that might make we could go for a walk, or you know, practical help is so much more important sometimes than the offer of help.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you know, no one wants to listen to me just talk about that for hours, because I would. But there is one final question that I would like to ask you about, and that is about music, which I feel like it's such an intrinsic part of this book. And what I loved is in your acknowledgements, you acknowledged the playlist that came along with the book itself.
Loved that.
And it's fair to say that I have added a lot of those to
that's
my
really cool.
life, because I'm like, yes, that's totally the feeling it gives. So can you tell us more about the role that music plays for you as a writer, and how it affected this novel?
I mean, it's really hard to describe because it is just huge. Like I can't write without the perfect. It's not even like I do have a playlist specific to sort of each novel, but I don't listen to it randomly. I write by zeroing in on one song which perfectly encapsulates the tone of a scene or a character relationship or something, but it is one song generally, and then I just play it on repeat like literally hundreds of times. So yeah, like every one of the artists I mentioned was a song I got hyperfixated on and sort of used as an emotional channel to kind of write a scene. And yeah, that's how I write pretty much everything I've ever written has had that. And sometimes the music seems like scene appropriate, and sometimes it's really not. But yeah, it's a method I've been using pretty much forever. So yeah, I literally can't write without music in that sense.
I know so many people that are like, I need quiet, I can't possibly have anything on.
Yeah.
I want access to all writers' playlists from here on out. I'll take nothing less. Like,
I mean, I could probably send you a screenshot of like every song on the Are You Happy Now playlist. Yeah,
Please
if you want
do
the
that.
specific playlist, I can definitely do that. Yeah.
We absolutely do.
Yeah, it's basically like, oh, Hannah's like music recs. Like,
Let's have it. So I am fully aware that somehow we've been talking already for like an hour, which is insane. But I cannot let you go without talking about sex, because
we always have to hit that.
We love it. So one thing I really
capitalism out of the way, and now we're on to like the good
we've done
stuff.
capitalism, the good stuff. We've done grief. Now let's do sex.
So
that's really the book summed up in just like one thing. It's like we've done capitalism, we've done grief, we've done sex. Book closed.
But first book,
you need to change your blurb now.
Sorry, I know. I keep cutting you off as well. Sorry.
Change the blurb for the paperback release because it needs to be
like
that.
that is a hell of a tagline. Like that would make me read it.
I would buy that straight away if I knew nothing else about it. So Lydia will know this all too well about me, is that I love a well-written sex scene because I have been exposed to too many really cringy sex scenes that I just, it makes my skin hurt. And there was an oral sex scene in this book that was so hot and just, I was literally like, could not breathe. I was like, this is so good. What do you feel is the best technique for writing a good sex scene? Because you've got it down.
I thought you were going to say
oral sex.
Well, if you've got that as well.
I thought you were going to say as well. Like, what's
it's not in my notes.
Like, what are your music recommendations? Any blowjob tips as well? Like, how do you approach the pussy? What was the question? Oh my god, what was the question? It was any tips for writing a good sex scene?
Yeah, what's your best technique, Hannah?
My best technique for writing a sex scene. Okay, well the song has to be, the vibes do have to be immaculate. You do have to get the right song first. This is a difficult one. I actually think I can put this down to actually reading a lot of good fan fiction, actually, and I mean like really good fan fiction. And I think a lot of authors like struggle to, and I know I have done in the past, because sex scenes are hard to write. It's struggling to strike a balance between like emotion and also not using like too many clinical terms, but also not being euphemistic and vague. And I think it's because like writing sex scenes well involves, it doesn't feel like technical writing, it's more like sensual writing. So it's much more about like the rhythm of the words as much as it is about like specific word choice. But yeah, I don't know. I think it is just like not being embarrassed by it as well. I think what makes a lot of sex scenes needlessly bad is that authors like find sex scenes embarrassing to write. And I think that's where like, all of the weird kind of euphemisms come in that people like talk about during the bad sex awards and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's just because, having had access to like fan fiction and stuff, I have just been fortunate to read some very, very well written sex scenes, between people of all genders. And so I've learned from people who, are a lot better than me, and I've used it to kind of form my own kind of style. But yeah, I mean, as you can tell, it's really hard to condense down into a technique, because it's literally just practice and like a willingness to try and seek out good sex scenes, like actually well written erotica, and just kind of see what you can get out of that, because it takes practice. It's like writing action as well, like writing scenes of extreme violence are also as difficult as writing a good sex scene. So yeah, it is just practice and like finding the material, I guess.
Amazing.
Does that satisfy you?
Yeah, well,
are you happy?
The book certainly did. So good. I wrote in my notes when I was writing these questions out, I'd written in my notes app because I'll make notes as I'm reading, and I literally just put a page number and put horny in capital letter. So it's good.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't think there are enough like romantic blowjobs in fiction where like, I don't know, it's just like, it's a really nice scene as well. Like, it's not, I mean, there are different, like, I think every sex scene in the book does have a different tone. And I think that scene is probably the most overtly romantic. And so it is, I think, going to be people's favorite, because the others are different in tone and content, definitely.
Yeah.
So good. Now, before we let you go, I would like you to do a quick fire of authors that have inspired you.
Oh, okay. Karen Thompson Walker, definitely. I think she does like that kind of ethereal kind of character driven dystopia really well. Probably Emily St. John Mandel as well. The Glass Hotel. This book owes a lot to the Glass Hotel actually, which I think is genius. It's my favorite of her books actually. The Glass Hotel was fantastic. I think also a lot of TV had an influence on this novel. I think The Leftovers as a series, like in tone, is very similar to this novel. I mean, there are various writers on The Leftovers, but it's one of the instances where the TV adaptation actually, I think, well surpasses the book.
Wow.
So yeah, I think they're the three off the top of my head. I think Ocean Vuong as well.
Yeah.
So good.
His like sort of very poetic style of writing, and also MXTX, who is the author of the Chinese Danmei novel Modao Bushi. My tones are not going to be correct, but it's Modao Bushi, which is the Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation. Like, I definitely owe a lot to like that Danmei specifically as well. So yeah, they would be off the top of my head the authors that probably had the biggest hand in it.
Amazing.
Fabulous.
So many good recs for us, Lyd.
I know. My list is getting longer.
I know. So I'm well aware that we have kept you over time, and I'm really sorry.
It's
Especially
okay.
as you've given up your Friday night for us, which is just wonderful. But honestly, thank you so much, because I've loved this conversation. And listeners, you need to go and run to buy yourself Are You Happy Now? I am going to put a link in the show notes for you to order yourself a copy. But if capitalism, grief and sex isn't everything you want in a novel, then I don't know what is. Please go buy it. Please let us know what you think, because we're going to be shouting about this from the rooftops through the whole month of February. And yeah, I'm just so excited for other people to read this. But yeah, thank you so much, Hanna, for coming on. Is there anywhere that our listeners can find you on social media?
I am on Instagram predominantly. I don't have a huge social media presence. I have a begrudging Twitter account, but I'm probably my most active on Instagram.
Perfect. Amazing. We will link all of those in the show notes. But yeah, Hanna, thank you so much for joining us today. And listeners, please do go buy the book. Please go give Hanna a follow. And if you would like to, and if you enjoyed this episode, please do rate, review and subscribe, as it helps to boost us in the charts. And you can give us a follow on Instagram at Pair of Bookends Pod. And all that's left to say now is thank you, Hanna, and bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you so much.